Welcome to the Transformative Principal podcast, where we learn how to be an amazing educational leader. I am your host, Jethro Jones. Are you ready to be a transformative principal? I'm looking for about 10 people who are ready to do what it takes to lead with integrity, find balance, and take your school to the next level. If you're looking to improve your leadership in a measurable way, go to transformativeprincipal.org/mastermind to see if you qualify to join a group of like-minded people who are ready to be the best principals in the country. Welcome to Transformative Principal, episode 169. Today I'm interviewing Jon Harper, the host of the My Bad podcast and an assistant principal. This is a great conversation, and we talk about how he started his podcast and why he's focusing on mistakes, because we don't usually like to do that, especially not in education. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Jon, and if you have a moment, please share it with somebody who could use it. I know there are a lot of people out there who are trying to be the best leaders they can, and please share this with them so that they too can get better. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am excited to have Jon Harper, host of the My Bad podcast, on today. Jon, welcome to the Transformative Principal. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jethro. It's my honor to be here.
Excellent. Well, I have been listening to your podcast for a while, and personally, I'm a big fan of making mistakes, and so I love that you have it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you started it and why you started it?
Sure. The podcast, like you said, is called My Bad, and basically each week I get someone to come on and share one big mistake, and there's two goals in that. The first goal is that we can learn from each other's mistakes. But the primary goal, my main hope, is that in hearing, some of the amazing educators and amazing leaders share their mistakes and have the courage to share what they share, it'll inspire others to. Because I just see so much nowadays, children and adults really stressed, anxiety levels are high, and people are just really, really down on themselves. And it concerns me. And I think a big part of that is we just beat ourselves up over mistakes. And I got the inspiration from it about a year and a half ago when I was watching my daughter have a soccer practice. And she had never played before. This was her first year on the team. And she was actually the only girl on the team, which didn't matter. She had a great time and she had an incredible coach. But I was watching the scrimmage one night and I'm watching her play. And they're actually playing against each other, her team is. And I look over and across the field, I noticed that she had scored a goal for the other team. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to mortify her. She is never going to want to play sports again. She's going to be a bucket of tears. This is going to be horrible. And as I can see her walking across the field, I prepared for the worst. I thought, okay, what am I going to say? Think about your speech, Jon. And before I could even say anything, she looks at me and she said, Daddy, I'm just like you. And I thought to myself, what? And I remember that I had shared with her probably a year or two before that when I was in high school, I scored a goal for the other team in sudden death overtime. I mean, it was an embarrassing. I'll never forget it. But it really hit me then that, if I hadn't shared that mistake with her, that whole moment could have changed her whole soccer experience, her whole sporting experience for her. But instead, she realized, well, you know what? My daddy made a mistake. I made a mistake. It's not that big a deal. Everybody makes mistakes. And so, that kind of got me inspired to have other leaders and teachers and educators come on and just share their mistakes.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful story of you being vulnerable with her and her being okay with being just like you. That's pretty awesome. Do you find that it's hard to get educators to admit their mistakes?
I'll be honest, I've been amazed, maybe not amazed, because the people that I interview are absolutely amazing. And I don't know if courageous is the right word. Sometimes I guess we can use courageous in different ways. Sometimes I think of courage as something you show on the battlefield. But I think being brave, and when educators come on, they have shared some stories that I am just absolutely amazed by. And it hasn't been that hard. And I think the biggest reason might be is that, that they've heard my show. And on the show, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes I share mistakes, especially in the first probably 10 episodes. I think I've had about 20 episodes so far. And in the first 10 episodes or so, each time I would start off by sharing a big mistake. And I think that opened the conversation up. It showed that I was willing to be vulnerable. And once I did that, I think it made the guests feel more comfortable. Like, okay, he's going to share that. I feel more comfortable sharing my mistake. And I think it's the same thing with our children. I think our own kids or our students or our staff or, friends or loved ones, when we are willing to show that we're vulnerable, I think it gives them the courage and the power to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely does. One of the things that I've seen is that as I have been vulnerable myself, it helps other people be vulnerable. But more importantly than that, it helps me not be so afraid of making those mistakes. And that is really powerful and helps me get over future mistakes a lot easier when I'm sharing my mistakes on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest, I literally, I don't know when this show is going to go on, but I literally just published a piece today called I Worry Less. In other words, I don't worry as much about making mistakes anymore. I just published it today. And, I used to worry more about making mistakes, but now, I mean, maybe it's because I have a show. Maybe it's because I reflect more on them. Maybe it's because I realize, it's just, I'm human. It's not that big a deal, but, we all make them. And I think the more we empower our students and staff to feel comfortable in making them and take chances, the better off we are, because I don't worry as much anymore. I think it was Maggie Bellotto came on one of my earlier episodes. And for listeners, it is probably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful episode of My Bad that I've had to date. I mean, the story she shares is absolutely amazing, and it'll bring you to tears. It's powerful. But in the episode, she talks about how, once the words leave your mouth, once you talk about the mistake, once you share it, the mistake is almost powerless over you. And those words really rang true that day, and they still do today. I mean, obviously we try to learn from our mistakes and we don't try to make them, but I don't worry as much about them. I worry less, kind of like the piece I wrote today. I don't worry as much at all.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. When I came on your show, I was thinking about what I would share, and I made lots of mistakes, and I'm able to admit that many, many times very freely. But when I talked about what I did, which was that I worked too much, I had this awful complex when I first started in education that I needed to be, like those people in the movies, like Freedom Riders Journals or whatever that movie was called, Freedom Riders. I don't remember,
right. But, yes,
but I had to like put everything into it. And I mean, the thing that was crazy for me is when I woke up one morning and I realized nobody cared that I had spent 15 hours working the day before. And the only one who thought they cared was me. And I didn't even care that much. And, that I think it's easy for us to feel like we got to be more than we are. And we just have to recognize who we are and recognize what our strengths are, and then focus on being able to do things that help magnify our strengths.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you watch TV or especially movies, they can glamorize things. And don't get me wrong, there's amazing teachers out there. And there's so many. I work with amazing teachers every day, but you watch the movies and you think, wow, I need to be just like that. Or, sometimes that's the danger of social media, because you see everybody's best side. You see everybody's perfections. And, you have to be yourself. You have to find your own strength, and you have to run with it. Actually, Principal Kafele, Baruti Kafele, pardon me, came on an earlier episode, and he talked about how early in his career, when he first became a principal, he tried to lead like Joe Clark, the character Morgan Freeman plays in Lean On Me. Mm-hmm. And he said it just bombed. He said it wasn't him, it wasn't his style, and he realized it. I mean, and who hasn't watched that movie and been fired up and thought, yeah, I'm going to go in there like Joe Clark, and you realize, no, it's not. I mean, that worked for Joe Clark, but there's only one Joe Clark, and we each have to find our own strength and play to it and be ourselves.
Yeah, I recently told my staff that I'm moving to a different school, and those who have been listening to the podcast have heard a lot about the great things that we've done at my current school. And what helped me finally make the decision was recognizing what my skill set is, and recognizing that I'm really good at winning people over, getting people inspired behind a vision. And we've been able to do that at my school. And in one of the meetings that we had earlier this year, the people in the meeting were coming up with the ideas that I had been trying to push us to for the past couple of years, and how amazing that was to me to see that we're all on the same page now. And that's when I felt like it was that I've done what I needed to do for this school, and it's time for me to let somebody else come in and use their strengths to really refine and put good processes in place and how powerful that is. What are some of the skills or some of the ways that you have learned what your strengths are, Jon?
I think it's very important to know to just listen. I think oftentimes teachers will come to you, parents will come to you, even students, all three. They'll come to my office. In other words, I'm an assistant principal. They'll come to me, and our first reaction a lot of times is to think like we have to solve a problem. And I've learned sometimes people just want to be listened to. And sometimes people can solve the answer themselves. They can solve the problem themselves. But I've learned just to really, really listen and not feel like I have to have an answer right away. I listen to students. Sometimes they just want to vent. I listen to parents. Parents sometimes just want to come in and vent because, we're serving their children. That's the most important thing in the world to them. And of course they're going to come in angry at times because they have concerns. And that's their most important thing in the world. And teachers come in and they're at different stages in their career. And, I wrote a piece one time comparing different leadership styles to the giving tree and how, sometimes you have to be that person who just sits there and listens. And sometimes you just have to be the person that does give them advice. And then there's times where there are going to be teachers that don't come to you much at all because maybe they have families, maybe they have to leave right after school and they go home. But I think really knowing your staff and getting to know your staff as people first and teachers second is something that I've learned is really important. If I see them as a teacher first and a person second, then I think I've lost. I think it's really important, and I get the first words when I see them each day can't be, how your test scores, how'd the math benchmark go? It needs to be, how's your kid doing? How'd the Little League game go? Are you feeling better? I know you were sick last week. How's your mom? Something like that. I think that's what I've learned is really key. I mean, it's cliche to say, but it is all about relationships.
Yeah, and how does that, treating people as people first, how does that really impact people in their day-to-day jobs? Talk a little bit more about why that is so powerful.
I think it adds, like John Maxwell says, like John Maxwell talks about it a lot, it adds value to people. It helps them feel better about themselves. Education is a very difficult job, and I think it's getting more and more difficult each year. I mean, I look and see what teachers have to do nowadays, and I think when I was teaching, I didn't have probably 1/4 of the things to do that they have to do. And I think getting to know people as people lets them know that, when you walk through, they don't need to worry, that you value them, and that, I always say, education is what we do, it's not who we are. And it's very easy for us to beat ourselves up because it's just, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And I just think it helps people feel better about themselves. And I think if I can show them that, then they can do the same thing with students. I try to model that. And then hopefully they model that in the classrooms with their students. I mean, obviously math, reading, writing, that's important. But, you're teaching a child first and then you're teaching content second. And I mean, that's another worn out phrase I know, but it's so true.
Yeah. The worn out phrases, the cliches, we hear them all the time. And yet when you really think about it, they are the truth. And, treating people as people first is certainly important. I had a conversation with a teacher just the other day, and it was something that I needed to correct her on. And I asked her, help me understand why you're struggling with this aspect. And she said, well, this is what's going on. And once she explained it, then I was like, okay, I can see why you need to act that way, why you think you need to act that way. And I said, but acting that way is not appropriate. How can I help you not act that way and help support you so that you feel like somebody's got your back and dealing with this that's causing you to act inappropriately? And she basically said, just talking about it and you pointing it out that I need to change is probably all that I need. And, it would have been really easy. And when I was younger, it was easy to write that person up and make it a bigger issue than it needed to be. And I just felt like with this teacher, it was appropriate to just say, what's going on? How can I help? And treat her as a human being first. And it made a big difference. And hopefully that increases her respect and willingness to work with me. And more importantly, I hope she sees that and says, I can do that with my students also. And if we can inspire people to treat others even better, like people first, then I think we're doing a good job as leaders in that regard, at least.
No, I think that's very powerful and that's very true. I think it's easy to sit back and watch someone do something wrong or make a mistake and think, you know what, I've got to write them up. Or how in the world could they have lost their temper? Or how could they have forgotten this? Or how could they do that? And then all of a sudden we make that mistake and we think, wow, well, I'm human. I make that same mistake. I mean, let me think. I wrote a piece one time. Let me think. I used to think, in other words, when students would come to school and you see a child and maybe it appears that they're not being taken care of. And my initial reaction was, you know what, that parent is not taking care of their child. And, I think, well, maybe I need to call social services. Maybe I need to look into this. What's this parent's problem? And as I've become a parent myself, I realize how damn hard it is to be a parent and to juggle all these things. And I think you have 4 kids yourself, correct? I mean, it's hard. And I actually wrote a piece several years ago. My son was in daycare, and I'll never forget it. One day, I dropped him off, and, I thought everything was fine. And then I get home. I would drop him off for daycare. My wife would pick him up. And so I get home, and we're all there, and she's sitting there, and she said, my wife said, did you notice anything different when you dropped Derek off? And I said, no, everything seemed fine to me. She said, well, Miss Janet, that was his teacher, said when you dropped him off, he had his, how can I put this? His little friend was peeking out of his pants. I had somehow dressed my child so his little buddy was out of his pants. He's like 2 or 3 years old, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? And if a child ever walked into my school with, something of that nature, I would, I'd want to call social services right away. And here I am, an administrator, sending my child to school not properly covered. And I thought, wow, John, this is a lesson right here. You need to remember that when you see kids come to school and maybe something's not quite right, you need to give that person a little grace. You need to give them a little breathing room because, I mean, I'm married and I'm very fortunate to have all the resources available to me. There's people that are raising kids by themselves and are struggling just, day to day just to make it. And, you got to give them a break. And I was like, it was a wake up call. I mean, I'm thinking, if I can be guilty of that, then I can give some parents some slack on, shoestrings or maybe this, that, or the other. And it wasn't that I was really judging them that poorly. I just thought, okay, well, maybe they don't this or maybe they don't that. But I'll tell you, once you become a parent, you really see things through a different lens. At least I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see how difficult it is to keep everything organized and taken care of. And despite being educated and capable and all that stuff, it's still difficult no matter who you are. Having kids and raising kids is not an easy thing to do. And we do well to remember that for the sake of our parents at our school.
Absolutely. I think it's the hardest job there is. It's the most rewarding, but it's also the most difficult job.
That was a great interview with Jon. I think he's got a lot of good stuff going on. I'm glad that you were able to listen to him. Also, next week, I'm going to continue my conversation. We're going to talk about the Q-tip strategy and how to be a better leader when you're leading others and how to hear people's stories and find out more about them so that you can have empathy and support them better. Thanks so much for listening to Transformative Principal Podcast. I love doing this. It makes my day, and I'm so grateful for you listening. And this is an awesome thing to be able to do. So thanks for being here and listening with me. Transformative Principal is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators by educators. Visit edupodcastnetwork.com for more great podcasts.